Entrepreneurs know some of the most challenging times when starting a business are at the beginning. At Genesis, they've harnessed all that beginning excitement into the first ever electrified GV70, featuring the silhouette of a coupe and the capability of an SUV. Learn more at genesis.com. Genesis, keep beginning. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Zoe, and you're listening to Climbing in Heels. This show is all about celebrating the most extraordinary superwomen who will be sharing their incredible journeys to the top, all while staying glamorous. Today with me, we have interior designer, author, chef, and the founder and CEO of EyeSwoon, the beautiful Athena Calderone. In this episode, Athena talks about leaning into what brings her joy, falling in love, and putting her career on hold and seeing the world through a different lens. I'm so excited for you all to listen to this episode. It's a really good one, and you will learn a lot and take away a lot and hopefully feel a little more confident in your superpowers. I can tell you that the common thread of the countless women that I have had incredible conversations with, none of the journeys have been easy. None of them have been sort of this beautiful blueprint of the plan of the life. And like
that's not reality.
No. And like by 25, I'm going to do this. And by 28, I'm going to do this. And by 31, I'm going to be on my third child and start my second company and like all this stuff. So what I like to sort of get into, what I like to talk about is definitely want to start first. So you grew up in Long Island. I know this, right?
I did. Not too far from you, I guess.
Okay.
But a little bit of a world away. I was in Nassau County. Where were you?
Yeah. I grew up in Short Hills in New Jersey. We used to call it Short Thrills. And, you know, everyone here in LA is like, what's that? I'm like, it's Brentwood in New Jersey is really what it is. Actually,
I don't know why I thought you grew up in Long Island as well.
Everyone does. Everyone does because we never did anything in New Jersey. We never went to the shore. Since the day I was born, we went to the Hamptons. We went to Amagansett. And my parents were New Yorkers. So I think it was sort of this place that we lived, but we didn't really exist that much. Like I went to school there, but we didn't have such a life there. We were like always in the city. I was always at museums and theater. My parents are culture freaks.
Sure.
So I think people just think either I grew up in New York or Long Island because that's just sort of where I always was, you know, and that's where most of my friends are, honestly. So you grew up in Long Island, and what kind of child were you? Were you like this outgoing, magnetic, charismatic, like dream big kind of girl, or were you like in the corner, super shy and like timid and like...
I mean, it's kind of funny. I lived in fantasy world. I was a big dreamer. I was like a very much of a girly girl.
Okay.
My parents were both hairdressers. I grew up in the hair salon and I grew up around a lot of colorful people, creatives, you know, loved living in this like fantastical world.
But it wasn't a fancy world, right? More like an artsy, creative.
I did not grow up fancy at all. My parents, we didn't grow up with any money. We were kind of lower class, but happy. Like
I was going to say, but happy.
Happy and imaginative. And my family was a little chaotic.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
as they are, as everyone.
Yeah, as they are. But, you know, big Italian-American family, lots of energy, lots of, you know, coming together around the table, lots of loud, boisterous expression always. And I was always the youngest.
Food.
A lot
Lots
of food. A lot of food, yeah. So I would hide out in my rooms and play make-believe all the time. I was an absolute dreamer. I was always like ready to try something, you know, creative on, but I did, as I grew up, start to develop this strange insecurity that almost carries through to the day right now that like, I didn't know what my thing was.
Okay.
I would always try something, whether it was, you know, I'm talking about really young, like dancing or gymnastics. And I don't know, I always had this kind of like chaotic and creative spirit. And I never quite knew where it would land and started to feel shame surrounding the ping ponging of trying lots of creative things without anything sticking.
Okay. Which is very common, by the way, and interestingly common on this podcast. So very interesting. I know. Yeah. I know a lot of people are like, I couldn't find my way. I couldn't figure it out. I wasn't a student. I tried a million
Oh, I
things,
wasn't a student. I wasn't a good student.
So funny.
I definitely had ADD, but nobody
Right.
like figured that
Right.
out yet.
No one ever talked about
But
that.
I loved to write and I loved like art class and I threw myself into like dance and, was on a dance team in high school. And, that was kind of what gave me discipline was dance.
Okay.
And then again, I wasn't a good student. I didn't know what I wanted to study in college. And I just I bopped around to multiple different schools and colleges as well. And I studied dance. I knew I wasn't good enough to be successful at dance. I thought I wanted to do fashion. And, I just was all over the place and I exhausted myself, but I was still happy.
Right.
But I was just I was a bit of like a creative chameleon.
Sure.
Whoever I was around or my boyfriend was, he was a dancer. So then I was a dancer. I didn't have this stake in the ground of who I was and what I wanted from this world. So what I did was I just started to try everything that interested me. And even though there was shame around it, I started to realize that each of these interests were I was self-educating and formulating my interests. And I never knew where they would land. And I always felt a little defeated when they didn't materialize into what I thought quote unquote success was.
And at this point you were what, in 2020, in your 20s, right?
Yeah. I was 19, 20 when I moved to Manhattan after going to a couple of different colleges and nothing sticking. And you
feel so insecure, right? At that point. Because everyone, I feel like when we grew up, there was if you didn't go to college, it was such a thing. And what's so funny is that I'm going to argue to say that at least 50% of the women I've had on the podcast did not go to college, barely graduated high school. I like to talk about education a little just because I like to touch on it because I really stand by that our education really doesn't define who we are in any way. And I think it's, listen, I think some people really lean on it and it really serves them in their lives. And I just think so many people don't go to college or choose their own path in their educational journey. And I think it's sort of listen, I always say I learned more in my first week of work than I learned in 4 years of college. Not that I'm against college for everybody, but I just think that conversation is getting more and more relevant,
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting though, is it really was a wound for a really long time. I felt inarticulate. I didn't feel like I had, I just didn't feel studied. I didn't feel like I carried myself with wisdom and with confidence. And I thought that the cure to that was an education and was college.
Because it's the box you didn't check, right?
It's the box I didn't check. Exactly. But I will say this, education has in some way been the thing that helped me find myself, but not in a traditional sense. Not a college education, but self-education. And if I didn't dive down the rabbit hole of discovery in the culinary space and in the design space and teach myself the things that I was most passionate about, I wouldn't feel confident in what I do now. And that wound almost continuously to this day makes me have this moment of pause. When any opportunity is offered to me, it's almost because I still come from a little bit of that wounded place, I compensate and I over educate and I over prepare because not that I'm trying to prove something to the client
or to yourself,
it's to myself.
Of course.
So I feel like I've used a bit of my insecurity to help me gain my own confidence and my own knowledge. And that gives me more pride than if I would have gone to college.
100%. And I want to talk about that for a second because it's funny. I did go to college and get a formal education and the whole thing. And it's funny because that insecurity is definitely something that I carry as well. And I think throughout my entire career, I over prepare for everything. And I actually was on a podcast talking about that. And he asked me, how do you feel about being prepared? And to your point, I think that when you are trying to still prove to yourself, right, it's that don't get complacent, don't get overconfident, over prepare because you have to crush this. You have to crush everything you do, right? But you educated yourself. And I think it's sort of like that education ultimately in the fields that you love. I mean, it is an education, right? You're doing your education every single day. I mean, and I would argue. And now you're teaching other people and people are learning from you, which is so amazing.
I always want to be the student and the teacher.
Sure.
Like I love to share all of the tools and all of the information I've amassed over time, because I think that people are sometimes too tight with their quote unquote, like career proprietary knowledge. And I'm like, I want everyone to enjoy a meal like I do, or set a table. Like I want to teach people their own tools, maybe through the lens of some of the principles I've learned over the years.
So, okay. So first off, you became a mother very young, right?
I did.
And how old? You have a son, right?
I have a son. He is 20 years old
I don't even understand that. You look 20 years old to me, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. Bless you. Yeah. I mean, I got pregnant at 26, which isn't that young.
It's not that young.
It's not that young.
No, that's normal.
It was just, for me, it happened before career.
Yeah.
So, I moved to Manhattan. Like I said, I was either 19 or 20. I worked in the nightclubs at the Limelight, the Tunnel, and the Palladium, which is like just crazy. I'm sure you were. I had a shaved head and a septum ring.
Of course you did.
I was like working my like bad girl, because I was such a good girl look, like charcoaled eyes and like the septum ring and the white tank.
The white tank. Yes. Oh my God. I could see that though. I like that for you. Actually, I could see it.
It was really fun. I was just trying to be like badass because I was such a good girl, like literally. I did some modeling that didn't really work out. I went to acting school. I was studying method acting. That turned out to be amazing, but also really intense for me. I think I was just like too fragile. I've always like been this person that's like outside watching myself, and it caused me to like watch myself that much more, and using your art for, to tap into your trauma for your art was just like, it just wasn't good for me.
Sure.
It wasn't making me happy, but I felt really unaccomplished.
Okay.
I felt like I was living in this like beautifully dynamic city that offered so many opportunities, and that each opportunity I tried to grasp at or achieve or was passionate in wasn't quite panning out for me.
Yep.
And, I ended up falling in love. And, I met Victor when I was 19 or 20, the year I moved to Manhattan. So I'd literally like been with one teenager before I was with Victor.
That is unreal.
It's just crazy. And I know you probably, I'm sure we'll get to it later, but you have a similar story, which I love. But everybody says, you have to find your career before you find love, and you have to find your career before you have a family. And everyone believes that. And I believed that, but
not true.
I leaned into what brought me joy.
Yeah.
And career wasn't working for me, and I hadn't figured that out yet. But what I did figure out was my gold was my love and my family. And that's at a time where I was just struggling to find me. I found me, and the joyous, jovial, happy human that I am came alive around Victor.
I have such chills. I have such chills. God.
Yeah. And having a baby, it was just like the sweetest, beautiful moment in my life, where Victor was on the road traveling around the world, and we had this newborn baby, and we just traveled everywhere together. I just put me and career on hold, and I just explored my beautiful family life and travel, and seeing the world through a different lens as a mom. And all of a sudden I was like discovering architecture and design and patina and texture and flavor and all of this stuff that I was just like, my eyes were absorbing everything. My taste buds were being taken on this journey. And it was just like, I was just absorbing so much beauty. And, that time of like being a mom, even though it's probably frowned upon, being a homemaker, traveling the world, it's informed everything that I am today. Really, that was like the impetus of all of it. It was just this beautiful home life what I am now and, going to culinary school and going back to design school and starting a design business and launching EyeSwoon, all of it is from those years of being home with my baby, Victor sometimes being on the road without me. And just, I don't know, I was this 27-year-old woman who wasn't developing herself out in the world like most 27-year-olds were. I was developing myself under the umbrella and the safety of the home. So it was never food or design. It was never one or the other. They always happened in tandem. And it happened within like the safety of like the home. Like the home became my school.
I was a psych major, so I always say, like, I just live my life as a therapist, just for my friends, for myself. It's how I think, it's how I'm programmed. I would say that you needed to actually be happy before you could do your life and your career. And that's sort of the thing. And what's so interesting is I was actually the reverse because I started working. I found my career, which I wasn't even really looking for. It just sort of happened. Maybe I was looking for it. I think it just all was so fast. But all of a sudden I woke up 18 years later. I'm like, oh my God, I need to have a kid. It was sort of like it was all happening. And then all of a sudden,
how amazing. We each have our own path.
100%. And that's my point. But in the reverse of that, I was going so fast that all of a sudden I had my first son and I felt whole and complete and happy, and then looked at my life in a completely different way. And to your point, you actually were like trying to find your happiness and you were so hard on yourself. This isn't working. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. And like, by the way, there's a lot of pain that comes along with that, right? Because you're trying these things and you're like, I suck at this. I suck at this. I suck at, and we're so hard on ourselves, right? So there's that. And then all of a sudden it's almost like the universe was making a decision for you that you couldn't then make for yourself, right? So you fall in love, you have a baby, you're at peace, you're living your sort of this nomadic, young 20-something life, rolling around with a baby. I mean, to me, that's the dream. But all of a sudden you're like, hey, this is what I'm obsessed with. This is what makes me happy. And then EyeSwoon born out of this, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
So I remember, it was funny because I remember when you sent me your first book. And I knew about you because we have a lot of mutual friends. And I was like, who is this incredibly beautiful, chic woman that everything she touches just looks so pretty? And I just remember like getting your book and it came with Palo Santo sticks, I remember, if I remember correctly. And I just remember my boys, I was like, this is magical. It's Palo Santo. So my little one just kept going around going, everyone needs Palo Santo. And he just kept putting it in every room and he would put it in his bed and sleep at night. And so I said, oh my God, this is incredible, because every page I turned was more beautiful than the next. And then we started spending time together at things in the summer. And I was like, she is just her own little magical elf that kind of walks around with her fairy dust and just you have this very sort of ballerina way about you, which is funny because I didn't know you were a dancer. I don't even know if you were a ballet dancer, but you have that very swan-like way in which you carry yourself. And it's so funny because I remember we went to this beautiful dinner, Zimmerman dinner, a couple summers ago. And I said, that was the prettiest dinner ever. It got me like excited to do my next thing. And I just remember afterwards realizing that you were the magic behind a lot of that setting. And Malcolm's like, well, Athena did that. I was like, okay, now everything makes sense to me. And I remember every aspect of it. And so I think, once you started this whole business, so that was probably like 10, 12 years ago, right? 2011, I think you started,
2011, right? I started, yeah. And it was really just a way for me to kind of share a lot. It was right after our first summer out in the Hamptons in Amagansett. And I had this like wealth of like knowledge about just doing my own renovation of like a home from top to bottom. And I was also hosting in my home and like creating recipes, and friends were asking for recipes and design advice. And I was like, you know what, let me just like write all this down for my friends on a Tumblr page. Yeah. So it was really I know, Tumblr.
Wow.
Crazy. So it really was just in some crazy way. Like if I go back and think back, the things like I wanted to model and that never worked out. But like part of like figuring out EyeSwoon was also like visual identity and, different than modeling, of course, but like it was about the image and about creating an evocative image. So it was like me picking up a camera and figuring out like photography. It was so like, it was incredible. Like, it was also like me figuring out, like, I love, like, the one thing that I loved growing up was writing in school. But like, so it was leaning into like all the various pieces of myself that I thought were irrelevant, that weren't accumulating to somewhere. It was almost like EyeSwoon became this container to hold of all of them. It was like everything in the home that I love, plus my love of imagery, plus my love of writing. And I was like, I finally realized that I didn't have to find a singular thing to make me successful, that I can instead use all of these little moments that were leading to me.
Entrepreneurs know some of the most challenging times when starting a business are at the beginning. At Genesis, they've harnessed all that beginning excitement into the award-winning GV70. And with the first ever electrified GV70, you get all that stunning design and innovative tech in an electric vehicle. The electrified GV70 features the silhouette of a coupe and the capability of an SUV. The exclusive G-Matrix grille stylishly hides the charging port. Inside, discover a driver-oriented cockpit featuring fingerprint recognition, available Napa leather, and premium navigation with a 14.5-inch HD screen. Engage boost mode for an exhilarating 483 horsepower. And when it's time to charge, DC fast charging will give you up to 80% charge in minutes. Your Genesis electrified GV70 is waiting for you. What will you begin? Learn more at genesis.com. Genesis, keep beginning. There's nothing worse than going to a doctor's appointment expecting to be the center of attention, and then your doctor seems like they have better things to do and clearly better places to be. Instead of listening to you intently and asking how you actually feel and helping you along, the doctor is actually looking at the clock. On ZocDoc, you'll find quality doctors who focus on you, listen to you, and prioritize your care. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them and treat almost every condition under the sun. When you're not feeling your best and just trying to hold it together, finding great care shouldn't take up all of your energy. That's where ZocDoc comes in. Using their free app that millions of users have come to rely on, you can find the right doctor that meets your needs and fits your schedule. Book an appointment with a few taps in their app and start feeling better faster with ZocDoc. Go to ZocDoc.com/Zoe and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within just 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/Zoe. ZocDoc.com/Zoe. It's really amazing. And now I feel like you are really this hybrid of so many things. That's what's so kind of amazing. And I think, when I think of you, it's home, it's entertaining, it's food, it's setting the prettiest table. And now you just did an amazing collaboration with Crate & Barrel, right?
I did. Yeah. This year was a huge year. And I've always really believed in the power of manifestation. I know I'm not an LA, an LA woman, but like, I do believe in setting.
You are very West Coast. Can I just put that out there? You seem very West Coast. You're very West Coast. You're very West Coast. Like if you told me you lived in Venice, like by the canals, I would 100% buy into that 1,000,000,000%. So.
Well, I do believe in setting intentions. And, years ago, I set the intention to write a book and I said, I don't want to just do design or food. I want one of each. Yep. And I really believe that with each year or each couple of years, it's so important to reassess what your goals are. And I wanted to do the books. I did the food. I did the cookbook that won a James Beard Award. I wrote the design book that's still a #1 bestseller. And I'm so proud of those. But then it was like, okay,
What's next? Sure.
Because I'm always wanting to grow and expand and figure out, how I can challenge myself creatively. And, the Crate and Barrel collection was something that I definitely put out into the universe years ago and started to build a relationship. And I think it's really important, like, as I started working together with brands, it was really important to me to relationship building is everything.
Everything.
Like, everything. Like, I cannot stress enough how important it is. Like, I only have a team of 5 now in this past year, but prior to that, I had 1 employee. She's been with me 8 years. Like, it's so important to build relationships. So my point being is that Crate and Barrel, I started small, building these relationships with them, working with them over the holidays to create, recipe development, holiday tablescapes, like just finding little ways that I could start to meet the team at Crate and Barrel. So it was, to your point, things don't just happen.
They don't just happen.
They don't just happen. It was, 3 solid years of doing content for Crate and Barrel.
Wow.
And then finally just, saying I'd love to be considered to do, I saw what they did with Leanne Ford. I was blown away by it.
That was beautiful.
There's so much about craftsmanship and quality. And, it was just something I put out there and it was really well received. And what's interesting is they wanted me to do a decorative accessories and tabletop collection, followed by a furniture collection. 6 months later.
Right.
And because I'm food and design,
you were like, I want to do it together.
Yeah,
of course.
Where those things overlap is around the table. So I was like, well, wait a minute. I can't show my dinnerware on someone else's table or style the objects on someone else's sideboard. So I went to them, which, sometimes you just have to be take a risk and just be balls out.
No, totally.
I went to Crate and Barrel and I was like, I know you guys know how to roll out your collections. However, I am the entirety of the home and I know that this would push the collection out, another 6 months, but would you consider just doing one holistic collection together? And that's what we did. It was 140 pieces.
Jesus.
It was the most beautiful.
That's incredible. I mean, I saw it. It's incredible. I mean, I lost my mind. And I also think listen, I know Crate and Barrel is this huge, incredible brand. I mean, I've known it since, the beginning, but I feel like you just brought such incredible value and even more recognition in this sort of, honestly, in the chic space. I'm just going to say it, in this chic and stylish place that I know that they want to be considered, right?
Thank you.
But one thing I really want to talk about, because it kind of goes back to sort of, girls asking guys out now and all that kind of stuff. And, I like to talk about in business because there's a lot of questions that I get about I don't know, I would never want to ask for this, or I would never, whatever. And so I want to just touch on the fact that you actually, because this is not protocol necessarily, right? And so you can sit and wait around for opportunity to fall on you, or you can say, hey, we know each other. We've already been dating, right? And I've been writing for you guys. I know the world of Crate and Barrel. I know, but guess what? I now want to do more. And I think you should consider me for this. And not just do I want to do entertaining, but I actually want to do furniture and at the same time. And guess what? It worked. And I have a theory about creative people. And I always have, and maybe because I am one, but I think the minute you try to stifle, control creative minds and creative people, it really limits the possibilities of what they can do. And I find that if you just empower creative talent, that's when you see the magic happen. But I think there's a lot of mistakes in that space where, a lot of times corporate America gets in the way and I love corporate America, but I think sometimes, I think we all just have to own what we do, right? And what our strengths are and what our challenges are. And trust me, I have a laundry list of challenges and I am hyper aware of them, but we all do. And we're all different learners and we all have different gifts, right? And I think that you're just yet another amazing example of not being this traditional learner, this traditional person that was like, oh, I'm going to run through the education system like everybody else. I'm the same kind of learner as all the other kids. And that's why I just, as a parent later in life, I just constantly scream at the top of every mountain I can find that every child has their own magic. Every child has their own intelligence. Every child has their own superpower. And I think it's only now that the schools and the world is starting to embrace every kind of learner and not sort of tripping them up and saying, you have to learn this, you have to learn math like this, you have to read like this, you have to write like this. That's all changing. And I think that when I listen to you and a lot of the amazing women that I've had on Climbing in Heels, so many were lost. Listen, I was not a student. I was when I tried and then I got A's and whatever, but it wasn't my calling. I didn't want it. If my parents said to me, you didn't have to go to college, you can start working, I would have 100% done that. 100%. And I think for them, they just sort of knew what I was capable of. So they were like, we know you can do this. So please just do this. And then you can work for the rest of your life, And in hindsight, I look at college as the place I grew up, right? I look at it as the place where I learned to take care of myself, but that's not for everybody. And I think that conversation is getting more and more, peeling back more and more layers of that conversation now with our own kids. But I think for you, I look at your success, I look at who you are, and I know that it didn't happen overnight. And I know that you've worked your ass off. And I know that there were challenges. And I think the one sort of last thing I want to talk to you about is sort of like, were there moments where you were like, I'm done? Like sort of those moments that you tripped up and said, you woke up in tears, you're like, I can't find my way. I can't do this. None of this is working. I'm done. Right? Like, and then was there that moment, contrary to that, was there the moment, if you remember it, where you were like, okay, I got this. I'm good at this. I can do this. And this is working,
Yeah. I mean, I would say like just before I started EyeSwoon, I had this moment where like, I don't know that it was like diagnosed, but I was depressed. I was definitely depressed.
We've all.
And I would turn inward and get really like quiet and contemplative. And Victor, we've been married 24 years. And like, I remember that was like the only time in our marriage that he was like, are we okay? Like, what's going on? And I remember like lashing out and being like, it's not us, babe. Right. Like you have like extreme success and I'm still like trying to find my way and feeling really empty. And I feel like a failure. That was a real big moment where I just couldn't figure it out. I felt trapped within the confines of my mind and I just couldn't figure out my place in this creative world. Wow. So that was like a big moment of
like self-reflection and like, and sort of like, it's those moments you don't really want to get out of bed in the morning. Because you're like,
I felt guilty too, because like I had a beautiful home, a beautiful marriage, a gorgeous child. Like, I also beat myself up about that as well. But it was just that like, I wanted more for me and I knew I had more to offer and I just couldn't figure out where it would land. So that was hard. And then I remember after I started EyeSwoon, there was like a series of like moments that, felt celebrated finally of like my House in Amagansett being published in Elle Decor was like a big moment. Then we had our apartment in Dumbo that,
the dream. So gorgeous.
Harper's Bazaar had done like a profile on that. And that moment when Harper's wrote this story about our Dumbo apartment, I had just launched EyeSwoon. I had something I felt pride in. So I kind of shared, what EyeSwoon was. And that culminated at the same time as Instagram launching. And there was this one moment that I only realized recently where somebody on Instagram, when I kind of was sharing that I did both food and design and how, the thread that ties them together is the umbrella of the home and how I was a mom, but I also loved fashion. And, anyway, I was sharing all of these varied parts of myself that felt chaotic maybe, but also under some sort of unifying world. Sorry, I'm getting off topic.
No, you're not at all.
Somebody made a comment in my like all of, 500 followers on Instagram, but somebody said at that time, I love that you can represent being more than one thing. And all of a sudden, I don't even know who this person was. I'd love to like go back and find that comment. But that just shifted something in me. And it made me realize that you don't have to be singular to find success. And that was the moment. And now, years later, I have a podcast called More Than One Thing, which I thought I like came up with on my own, but I didn't, because it was kind of from that Instagram comment. I guess my point is like inspiration and confidence and finding yourself can come from a myriad of different places. It comes from your own creativity. It comes from embracing all the facets of yourself. Sometimes in some random, like coming together of various worlds, like you can find yourself through social media.
Sure.
Or, I even think that like my eye has been refined and defined further through styling and through design and through photography and through Instagram. And it doesn't always have to be from an education in college. It doesn't always have to be from, I also had insecurity that I never came up the traditional workforce, like whether it be corporate or what, like, so.
Why are we so hard on ourselves? Why is that? It's wild.
Because I don't know. I like each step along my way, I've learned and I've improved and I've self-educated and I've gained confidence and I'm still on that path. Right after the Crate and Barrel collection, we decided to launch an e-commerce platform. And now I'm also leading into my own product development. And now I'm a marketplace and figuring out how to grow a team and run a business and, understand financial models. And this is completely new for me. And it's so foreign in a similar way, the way it was when I started EyeSwoon, like SEO was foreign to me and photography was foreign. So I constantly push myself into these uncomfortable moments because they are, and these fearful moments. I'm in a place right now where not that long ago today, I was like in tears about like, am I on the right path? Like, am I pushing myself away from my creativity to lean into this businesswoman and marketplace? It's overwhelming. It's confusing. I'm making expensive mistakes.
Yeah. By the way, in building a business, every freaking mistake is expensive. I can definitely say that. And a lot of women have said that on the podcast. And I think being an entrepreneur is a whole different part of the journey that goes from being you to we. And it's complicated, but I think to your point, I actually have never believed in singular. I have always believed in holistic. And that's always been my approach to styling. I always called myself a lifestyle brand, never just a stylist, because it's not just clothes. It's the hair, the makeup, how you carry yourself. It's all of it. It's how you entertain. It's how you live your life, right? And I think that that's what you're doing. And I just might add quite beautifully. So I'm a fan. You have so many fans. I'm so impressed with what you've built. And so many people are impressed with what you've built. And I also want to say that you've built success in a space that is considered to be very niche. And also, I think by doing multiple things, I think that you engage a lot of different kinds of people and a lot of different styles. And I think that what resonates so much, at least with me and people that have always resonated with me, are people that I can sense their passion for what they're doing and their genuine love. It's not just like, oh, I'm doing this to make money. It's like, I'm actually doing this because I'm obsessed with what I'm doing. And I'm going to obsess over every detail. Oh, and I'm going to share how I do that. Right. And I think that people, social media consumers in general, they're not dumb. And I think that people really sense the real deal and authenticity. And, my husband has always really screamed that at the top of mountains, is that ultimately the people that win are the people that are authentic to who they are. And, and clearly, at least from where I sit, and I'm not such a, oh, I want to watch this person, I want to watch this person. Like, I fell for you because I actually just love what you do. And I just adored you. And I could tell how much you love it. And again, you have this little swan-like way about you. Like, I knew you were a dancer before I knew you were a dancer. I can clock dancers a mile away. It's how they stand, how they walk, how they put things down. It's like,
no, it's so true. And thank you about saying the authenticity, because I do think that everything that I do now really was born out of this place of wanting to, I have always been about connectivity and community. And it's likely because I didn't have it. Like I didn't have it for a really long time in the workplace. And I also felt quite isolated as a young mom. So I always just wanted to bring people around the table to, you know, I was always a people pleaser. Like I wanted to create a meal for them and share the recipe with them. I want to learn and I want to push it back out into the world. And that is at the core of who I am and what I do. And that's at the core of what EyeSwoon is as well.
Well, I love it. And I'm so happy for you. And I mean, our listeners, they probably are already in love with you, but if they're not, they will be now because, you know, and also I'd like to say that you can't see Athena, but she's strikingly beautiful, but she also has incredible style. She's like the person that runs around in that like gorgeous outfit, like barefoot. And you're like, why does she look so cool like that? Like, you know, so I think I'm just giving people the visuals, but you know, I just think keep doing what you're doing. And my one takeaway for you would be just don't lose sight of what you love.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Because sometimes in business, when you're building business, all of a sudden what you love starts getting pushed down and you just catch it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you a question about,
of course.
You know, you built your business and your brand being a creative and being a stylist and following your gut and intuition in a creative space. How did you retain yourself as a creative as you became a businesswoman and an entrepreneur and you launched Curator and like, can you speak a little bit about like going from creative to founder and like how to make sure that you retained a bit of that creative foundation that you are built on?
Well, okay. So first, when I launched my TV show, my books and the Zoe Report, I was still styling full time. So for me, there was still so much creativity that I was able to project and get out of my system. And then in 2011, when I launched my clothing line, that was intended to be a part of my business, not full time. And ultimately what happened is it started when you launch a clothing line, it has to be full time. And as you may know from friends in the business, when you design clothing, about 10% of that is creative and the rest is business. And so I started to realize that while I love to create and design, I like to do that for other people because I like to wear other brands. I like to collect vintage. I like to wear it. And I love, and by the way, I still wear my own collection probably at least 60% of the time, just because there's things that I created that I love, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I think along the way, there are those moments where I stopped remembering, I started to forget why I loved what I was doing. Because in business, you do get tangled up in it. And especially when you're the founder CEO, it's like, it's a lot. And there's a lot of people leaning on you. And so I think it's very important to really retain the parts you love the most and try and delegate the parts that suck your time that you may not love as much, but they need to be done. And to me, that was actually the hardest part, was finding those magical people to do the parts that I couldn't do anymore, you know, but knew sort of my vision well enough to execute on it with me, if that makes sense.
I feel like I'm having a hard time retaining my creative footprint and, you know, figuring out what the structure of the business is so that I can get that support and delegate, you know, whether it be a president or, you know. So was it hard for you to pivot? Was it like a tough decision or did it just become very apparent? Do you trust your gut as you're making these shifts? Like it's hard to.
No, I mean, I had to stop styling quite honestly because I couldn't find people that I trusted to work for me. And I don't like to use the word work for me. I like to use the word work with me. But there were just countless people time after time after time that I couldn't trust with my clients. And I realized that my business of styling was not a scalable business because I couldn't be in all the places I needed to be. I had to step away and took a pause. I'm just now ready after, probably 7 years now that I could maybe style again because I miss it, but I miss it in a way that's healthy. Like I would style maybe 1 or 2 people now, you know?
Okay.
But again, because I know that I can do that and not have to lean on so many people to help me do that, if that makes sense. And because styling is so so touch, right? And it's so touch and it's so emotional. And that's always been my approach to it. And it's so personal, And so I think that it was impossible to hold on to all of that and all my other businesses. And so I had to really step away from that. And so I think that the pivot has to be when you're ready. It has to be when you can, I'm very lucky in that, Roger is my co-CEO and his strengths are my challenges and his challenges are my strengths. And so it works like that. Don't get me wrong. I want to hit him with a baseball bat sometimes, but but better him than a stranger, you know what I mean? That
of course,
but I don't know. I mean, some people would argue they rather it's a stranger. So I think it just depends. But I think for you, it's just hold on to what you love, because when you lose that, you're not happy. And so that would be probably my biggest piece of advice for you, because you are such a creative mind and such a creative soul. And I just, business is really not as fun, at least for me.
Yes.
It's not. And it's funny because I have really dear friends that are such successful entrepreneurs that live for it. They want to just start a business. They want to write a business plan. They want to do the model. They want to do whatever and then pass it off. That's the part they love. That's not the part I love. That's not the part.
Yeah, no, we love to.
Yeah.
The personal aspect of the building and the creative, connection and connectivity with other creative. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm definitely in a huge moment of growth and building my team and figuring out how, what those next steps are of building and of growth. And it's exciting, but I just want to, I have started to realize that I need to make sure I retain that creative footprint that EyeSwoon is built upon.
And don't grow too quickly. That's the thing. Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and also learned from talking to a lot of very successful entrepreneurs, is kind of doing one big step at a time and mastering that. And then in a year from now, do the next one, and I'm just using a year as a timeline is just figurative. But I just mean, I think the biggest mistake I've seen with people going from one thing to another or turning a creative into a business is doing 5 or 10 different things at one time and blowing it out. Not in the traditional sense, you're trying to do 80 different products necessarily at once, but it's almost okay, if you're launching your e-com, right? What does that look like? And let's maybe start in one area rather than doing 8 verticals on your e-com, right? Maybe do 2 or 3. And
that's great advice.
And win at that first, and own that first. And then when that's crushing it, go to the next vertical, because I think that's the thing, because I think minds like yours, minds like mine, and a lot of our friends, it's you want to do this, you want to do this. You can't just do that. You can't, because it's all tied together. But it's hard.
It's also why I think it's so important to have strategic advisors also, because I am this creative chaos of ideas.
Yes.
And I need somebody to be let's
grounding.
Focus on this.
Yes.
This is scalable.
Yes.
This has legs.
Yes.
This is what sets you apart.
Yep. Yes.
Cut fat.
Yes.
Basically.
It's true. It's true. And don't overstaff. And I think those are probably sort of the biggest, sort of, I guess, business words of wisdom that I could share with you, because it's just, I've seen so much. Mm-hmm. I've seen so much personally, professionally, and around me. And I will say entrepreneurs, I bet there's Entrepreneur 101 book of the greatest mistakes entrepreneurs make. And I can tell you that I know them firsthand from my friends, from uber successful people, from myself, from just living it, breathing it, seeing it, and there's so many things and everyone's oh my God, I feel you never make mistakes. I'm oh my God, I've made hundreds, we all do. But it's what takes you to the place that you're going next, and also makes you never do that again. Mm-hmm. It's the little kid, right? It's I'm
learning so much in this past year. I am so much more every day, every moment, every mistake is a moment to grow and expand. Well, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
No, I love and adore you. I can't wait to see you this summer. Thanks,
Rachel.
For being on. I love talking to you. I love you. I love all you do. So congrats on
Rachel.
It all.
I feel exactly the same way. And thank you for your generosity and sharing your process.
Keep your magic fairy dust wand of making things prettier all around you. All right, everyone, it's that time in the show when I answer 2 listener questions. So let's see what we have today. Okay, what internship is best for a college student looking to have a career in fashion? I would say work at a magazine. You will learn everything on the ground real quick. You know, you kind of do everything. So I would say first and foremost, because you really learn like the fashion closet and the styling aspect and the market work. You make the connections, you meet great women and men. But I would say that's the dream if you can work at a magazine. And I think if not, I would say work at a store where you can work in like personal shopping, because you learn real quick sort of how to style real women of every shape and size and every style. And I think that's sort of the best training you could possibly get, is to work in personal styling. Okay, I saw you make a breakfast pastry on your Instagram the other day. What was it? So I just recently, this past weekend, I do make crepes every weekend, which my kids love. I also make something called Dutch babies, which looks really hard, but it's super easy. And then this past weekend, I made matzo brie, which I haven't made in a while, which is basically like, it's almost like matzo French toast. It's sort of like super easy. You soak 5 sheets of matzo. I'm going to give you the recipe real quick. You soak 5 sheets of matzo. You run them under cold water just to soften them a little. Put them in a bowl. Add a cup of milk, 3 eggs or 2 eggs, vanilla, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and cinnamon, lots of cinnamon. You pour the liquid batter over the matzo and you pour it into a big frying pan and just kind of cook it in almost like a pie. And then when one side is cooked and brown, flip the whole thing over and brown the other side like a giant pancake. And it is just delicious. Don't forget to submit your questions for next week's episode. All you have to do is DM us your questions to @ClimbingInHeelsPod on Instagram, and I just might answer them. Thank you so much to my friend Athena for coming on the podcast. I loved hearing Athena talk about really developing herself in the safety of her home and really just sort of becoming this homemaker and finding peace after she became a mom. She was traveling all over the world with her husband, who was a DJ. She was very young. She had really tried and, in her opinion, really failed at multiple things and really struggled to find her creative, happy place and her real thing, you know, that she could really own and develop and find her peace and happiness. And it really came to her later after she became a mom. And so many people say you can't have a career while you're a young mom, or you can't, you know, once you have your kid, you can't start your career. And I think that one of the most important things that, you know, we talk about, and I think we've had a few conversations thus far on Climbing in Heels with women who really suffered in their lives by not having that full educational experience, not going to college and having that sort of box unchecked, and how empty that made them feel and how insecure that made them feel for so many years. And that, honestly, it really like hurts me. Because I feel like I really want to destigmatize that. I really want to keep continuing the conversation, because everyone's educated in different ways. And I think the more we talk about it, the less uncomfortable it becomes for women to just feel like, you know, trust me when I tell you, when you find your career path, you're educated very quickly. So if you want more Climbing in Heels content, follow me on @RachelZoe and @ClimbingInHeelsPod on Instagram for more updates on upcoming guests, episodes, and all things Curator. I will see you all next week. Mwah.